In addition to the military and diplomatic efforts of Alexios Komnenos that we learned about in the previous tutorial, he also achieved some domestic successes. He created a new, more stable currency in place of the solidus, which had been debased since the first half of the 11th century, so that the government would have more money to spend despite a shortfall of income from taxes. He also dealt with the ongoing conflict between Constantinople and the empire's aristocrats by inviting them to marry into the imperial family and appointing them to government offices. He also established a system of land grants to aristocrats in the hope that they would use these grants, which were temporary leases that expired with the death of the landholder, to pay and equip soldiers, in much the same way as the lords of European feudal estates would supply knights for the wars of their kings. And for the first time, he introduced mandatory army service. During the first half of the 12th century, Alexios' son John II built upon his military successes by pushing the Turks out of areas they had been occupying in Asia Minor, and securing these areas with new fortifications. He also allied himself with the Crusader forces in Syria, and cooperated with the Holy Roman Emperor in a campaign against the Normans. John's son Manuel further improved relations with the Pope, the kings of Western Europe, and the Crusader kingdoms, which made him much more highly regarded in Europe than any of his predecessors. Though in 1171 he confiscated the property of the Venetians living in Constantinople as a response to anti-Western demonstrations among the city's inhabitants. As those areas of the empire which had been subject to Turkish attacks grew more secure, cities that had been deserted were revived, and across the empire there was an increase in population and in economic activity. This period is known as the Komnenian Restoration. The last member of the Komnenos dynasty, Andronikos, broke with his predecessor's friendly policy toward the west, and shortly after he took power in 1183, the people of Constantinople massacred its Catholic residents, especially its Venetian merchants. Andronikos represented himself as an opponent of corruption, and though he tried to reform the imperial bureaucracy and the system of tax collection, his approach was harsh and made him enemies among the aristocrats, whose profits he was endangering. During his 2 years in power, he resorted to torture and executions, which sparked a series of rebellions that ended in his death and the rise of a new dynasty. The chaos created by Andronikos' reign and the circumstances of its end encouraged attacks from the empire's enemies. While he was still in power, a Norman army from Sicily advanced on Constantinople, but was turned back by his successor, Isaac Angelos. There was also an uprising in Bulgaria, which had been Byzantine territory since the early 11th century, but once again became an independent state. The worsening relations between the Empire and the West came to a head during the Fourth Crusade in 1202. The forces of Western Europe, like those that had preceded them, were transported on the ships of the Venetian Republic, but they found themselves unable to come up with all of the money they had agreed to pay for this service. The Venetians therefore decided that instead of sending their ships directly to the Middle East, they should collect the payment they were being offered by one side of a dynastic dispute in Constantinople if they would first bring the Crusaders there to defeat the other side. The result was that in 1204, a large Crusader army arrived at the capital, but instead of installing a new emperor, they ended up damaging the city and looting its valuables, because they were not satisfied with the compensation they were being offered. They then formed a committee, drawn from both the Crusaders, who were mostly French and Italian, and the Venetians, to choose from their own ranks an emperor and a patriarch. They divided up among their nobles all of the land they were able to take from that region. The Venetians and the Crusaders each received 3/8, and the new emperor got the rest as his personal domain. For their share, the Venetians, who were interested in trade routes and ports, were given Crete and some of the other Greek islands, while the Crusaders turned central and northern Greece into a few small states, like the ones that had already been set up in Palestine and Syria. The empire's Orthodox hierarchy was replaced with the Catholic one, though the Greeks were allowed to continue to worship as they had before. Those parts of Asia Minor which were not being occupied by Europeans came under the control of local Byzantine aristocrats, who made themselves the rulers of 3 small states. These immediately set out to attack the Crusader territories, which, since they were also faced with attacks from the Bulgarians to the north, would continue to shrink throughout the first half of the 13th century. Finally, in 1261, Constantinople itself was retaken by Michael Paleologos, who had been the ruler of the Byzantine state of Nicaea, but became the founder of a new imperial dynasty, which would last until the empire's end in the 15th century. Michael set about rebuilding Constantinople, which had been heavily damaged. This project, and the money he needed to pay his new army, forced him to impose heavy taxes on his most impoverished subjects. This made him unpopular, as did his plan to place the Orthodox Church under the authority of Rome in order to get the Vatican on his side in his conflict with Sicily, which was now ruled by the French royal family. Though in the end, both the Pope and his own people were opposed to this plan, and nothing came of it. In order to restore the empire's trade network, he turned to the merchants of Genoa, who were the competitors of the unwelcome Venetians. Michael's son, Andronikos II, who succeeded him in 1282, was faced with attacks from the Bulgarians, and from the Serbs who had invaded the Balkans. He tried to deal with these attacks with a combination of warfare and diplomacy, though without much success. He also had to deal with the growing expansion of the Ottoman Turks. At the same time, he reduced the size of his army so that he could free the peasants from the heavy taxes his father had forced them to pay. During the first half of the 14th century, the empire was further reduced in size by Ottoman and Serbian attacks, and then disrupted by a civil war in which one side asked the Serbs and the Turks for military assistance. The empire also suffered from the arrival of the Black Death in 1347, and from a series of powerful earthquakes in the years that followed. As Byzantine towns in Asia Minor were abandoned because of war, disease, and earthquake, they were occupied by Turkish settlers who felt no loyalty toward the imperial court. There was more fighting within the Paleologos family during the later 14th century, when its emperors could only prevent invasion by signing agreements that made them subject kings of the Ottomans. Then, in 1394, the Emperor Manuel II decided to stop paying tribute to the Ottoman Sultan, who began to subject Constantinople, which had been surrounded by very thick walls since the 5th century, to a years-long siege. Manuel traveled to Europe to ask for help from Italy, France, and England, but he came back empty-handed. In the end, it was the Mongols, led by Timur or Tamerlane, who had just invaded Asia Minor, that forced the Ottoman army to withdraw. This crisis was followed by a period of cooperation between Byzantines and Turks, which ended in 1421 when a new emperor, John VIII, came to power around the same time as a new sultan, Murad II. Both men decided to pursue a more aggressive policy, and after John backed a rebellion against the Sultan, Murad attacked Constantinople. In the end, the Byzantines agreed to back down and resume their tribute payments, but after another Sultan came to power in 1451, John's brother Constantine, who was now the emperor, resisted his authority. This brought about a new siege, which, together with the heavy artillery that the Sultan had imported from Europe, finally brought down Constantinople's defenses in 1453 and ended the Byzantine state. The city itself became the capital of the Ottoman Empire until it too came to an end after the First World War, though it remains the center of the Eastern Orthodox Church. In the next tutorial, we'll move on to the medieval peoples of Central and Eastern Europe, including the Slavic states of Kiev, Poland, and Hungary.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Support me on Patreon so I can keep making content. And as always, feel free to email me, ProfessorDaveExplains@gmail.com.